It's been an interesting week. Or weekend. It's been interesting since I've seen you last. Because we were in New Orleans, which was awesome. I love that city. I lived there like 25 years ago, before Katrina. And this is my first time that I've been back since Katrina. So that was especially hard. Yeah. Emotionally, it was complicated. Like, I cried on a couple of bus tours, which is just embarrassing, but there you go. I've missed y'all. I've missed reading, doing my nighttime readings with you guys. When last we left our intrepid explorers, Milo was in a bit of a pickle. He had gotten controlled by parties unknown. And said unknown parties were controlling him after he had visited the Mirror of Irisid. And he'd seen some things in there that disturbed him on a very basic level. And he announced at the end of the last chapter that he was going to go hide in the medical wing, since that's where he was supposed to be, and he wasn't leaving again until he had sufficient protection from evil amulets. And that is where we are beginning today, is the beginning of chapter 22, the Chessmaster, where Milo, and everyone else knows that Milo has been possessed at least once, and he is not pleased. The remainder of the week was, for Milo, blissfully uneventful. Classes resumed, and with them the hustle and bustle of several hundred Hogwarts students returning from their vacation. Pleading illness, and really who was qualified to disagree with him, Milo, true to his word, sequestered himself in the hospital wing with Neville. Hannah, after a few days of rest and dozens of different healing charms and potions, was deemed fit to return to school. He frantically crafted amulets of protection from evil and was researching Kelgor's Firebolt. It was here that Milo ran into a small problem of mathematics. It took 2 days, hundreds of galleons of owl-ordered supplies, because Milo found that he could affray the cost somewhat by supplies that he steals from the potions area, and 80 experience points to make each amulet. Milo really didn't know much about the demographics of this plane, as all he'd seen was a bit of Hogsmeade, Platform 9 3/4, and of course Hogwarts. But there were probably several thousand wizards and witches out there, even ruling out protecting the entire population and focusing only on those who possessed an imminent threat to Milo, which was anybody nearby who possessed a wand, had a drop of magical blood, could see lightning and hear thunder. The number of amulets required was insanely unrealistic. "This is just so backwards," Milo muttered after, upon reaching the end of the week, completing only his 3rd amulet of protection from evil. The problem was that an imperious wizard or witch was more of a threat to those around them than to themselves, so Milo, in order to protect himself, had to equip anyone and everyone around him with expensive amulets. The problem, however, was that magic item crafting benefited from no economy of scale whatsoever. It took 2,000 gold pieces and 2 days to make 1 amulet of protection from evil. It would take 200,000 gold pieces and 200 days to make 100 of them. While Harry was rich, Milo doubted he was quite that rich. At some point, Milo was going to have to start paying him back for this rather enormous loan. "What's backwards?" a familiar voice asked. Milo turned to the door to see Hermione standing there, a tray of hot soup in her hands. "Hey," Milo said. "I was wondering when you'd drop by." "Sorry," Hermione said apologetically. "I was going to come earlier, but, well, it's the first week back and I didn't want to get behind. I mean, I only had time over break to reread A History of Magic, Magical Drafts and Potions, 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi, and Magical Theory. I'm dangerously behind in the standard book of spells and a beginner's guide to transfiguration. Hermione pulled herself together with visible effort. But my responsibility as a friend outweighs even academic concerns, she said officially. Well, at least in an emergency. Except in exam period. Thanks, Milo said. Just set the soup down on the bedside table. So, Hermione said after doing just that, just how badly were you injured anyway? I remember after the troll you were on your feet in no time, and, well, you were in pretty bad shape that time, so, I mean, are you alright? Yeah, I'm totally fine, Milo shrugged, but if Pomfrey asks, I need another day of complete bed rest too, and make sure you get this right. Regenerate my recuperative and restorative healing abilities and realign my key power or pool die. You could die? No, Milo said. I just made all that stuff up. You're skiving, Hermione accused, aghast. Well, duh, but it's for a good cause, which reminds me. Milo fished out the 3 amulets of protection from evil from his magic belt. Arcane Mark, Arcane Mark, Arcane Mark, Arcane Mark, Arcane Mark, Arcane Mark. He cast repeatedly, placing a pair of unique symbols on each amulet for later identification. One symbol on each amulet was a faintly glowing rune which was, using Milo's magic anyways, virtually impossible for anyone else to duplicate. The local magic was largely one giant unknown. However, so Milo also put an invisible version of the mark on each amulet as a backup, one that only Milo could see, and even then, only when he cast See Invisibility first. If someone out there put an invisible version of the mark on each amulet as a backup, if Snape tried to switch the amulets for forgeries, and they somehow managed to duplicate the decoy mark, they wouldn't even know about the invisible one. What was all that about? Hermione asked. For later identification, Milo said. I mark all my important stuff that way. Comes in handy more than you'd think. Here, put this on. Milo handed her one of the amulets. It's, pretty? Hermione tried desperately to sound delighted, but the fact was that the amulets were little more than a small silver discs on thin but sturdy steel chains. Is it? Milo asked. Aesthetics were never my strong suit, to be honest. Appearances aside, that right there's what we in the business call a magic item. What's magic about it? Hermione asked, examining it cautiously. It makes you immune to the Imperious Curse, Milo said nonchalantly. I'm sorry, Hermione said. Could you say that again? See, here I thought you said that this little necklace is supposed to protect you against one of the darkest, most powerful curses in existence. Yeah, Milo said, and any other mind-affecting magic also. Just make sure you keep it on at all times, and give this other one to Harry, and I'll have Ron's done sometime tomorrow. Hermione stared at Milo, evidently trying to decide if he was joking or not. You're serious, aren't you? She asked. I mean, I'd heard from Ron that you had a spell that did something like that temporarily, but this is big. Do you understand? Really big. Well, I guess. I mean, it's pretty trivial magic where I'm from. Blocking the Imperial Curse is trivial? Hermione exclaimed. From what I've read, during the last war, the other side managed to infiltrate the Ministry at every level, and we're still not sure who was bewitched and who was a volunteer. It was utter chaos, and you know who nearly toppled the entire government that way. It takes exceptional willpower, as in one person in hundreds or years of training to resist. How could preventing something like that possibly be trivial? I figure it's something like transfiguration. Using arcane magic, my magic that is, turning a matchstick into a pin requires an extremely powerful spell, and healing injuries like Pomfrey can do with a wave of a wand is nigh impossible. On the other hand, I can see right through Harry's super rare and expensive invisibility cloak without much difficulty because, well, for us, mere invisibility is an everyday sort of thing. Ironically, it's the inferior disillusionment charm that I can't beat, which actually reminds me of something, Hermione, that I was going to ask you, Milo said. Oh? Do you know of any spells that can change someone's heart's desire, if only temporarily? What does that have to do with the disillusionment charm? Hermione asked, perplexed. Long story, but can it be done? Let's see. Hermione scratched her chin, deep in thought. I presume you're talking about the mirror. It really depends on what exactly heart's desire means. With a decent confundus charm, or maybe even after being obliviated, which leaves the target in a highly suggestive state, you can definitely force someone to want something. Whether that counts as your new heart's desire, however, I think is a matter of interpretation. Milo was crushed by disappointment. He'd hoped to trick the Mirror of Irised into showing him whatever he needed to see, but he was pretty sure that he'd destroyed his chances of getting a favorable outcome in any matter of interpretation when he tried to use spontaneous divination to mimic a cleric's spell. However, Hermione said, looking thoughtful, it's possible, unlikely, mind, but possible, that a sufficiently powerful love potion might have the desired effect. A love potion, Milo said flatly. It basically comes down to how, fluffy one interprets the meaning of heart's desire to be. Will someone who is madly in love, but drugged by a potion into loving someone else, see their one true love, or the person who is pressing on their minds at that very moment? The answer to that, I really couldn't tell you. Seems more up Professor Dumbledore's alley, to be honest. It's all academic in any case. Harry said he was going to move the mirror. I doubt we'll ever see it again. Of course we will, Milo said. It's on the list. If it wasn't going to pop up again later for something important, why would we have seen it after Christmas? It would have been a complete waste of everybody's time. You have a very unusual view of the world, Hermione said, her tone making it perfectly clear how she felt about that. It's never led me astray yet, Milo said defensively. Now that is a matter of some debate, she said. Oh, also, McGonagall told us that Dumbledore officially pardoned the Gryffindor house for assaulting the Slytherins and potions. Apparently we've fallen precipitously behind even Hufflepuff, not that there's anything wrong with them, in our courses because of all of these detentions. Well, that's a relief, Milo said. I badly needed that time for spell research. There just isn't enough hours in the day. Tell me about it, Hermione said sympathetically. I don't see how I'm going to fit in all the courses I want into my schedule in third year, she said. Which reminds me, I really need to get back to studying. After she left, Milo returned to work on Ron's amulet. He'd have to spend most of the rest of today and tomorrow on it. But Sunday was saved for Quirrell's Dueling Club. So some of you are probably wondering why the defense professor would start a dueling club, Quirrell stammered to the assembled students. Roughly 1/3 of the entire student body had signed up for his club, from first years to 7th years, and stood assembled in the Great Hall. Because whatever you could learn in this club, surely I could teach you in your regular course? Milo blinked. He hadn't been wondering that at all. He'd mostly been wondering how much longer he had to wait before magically curb-stomping some local wizards. Well, the difference between defense against the dark arts and dueling lies in your opponent. Can anyone tell me what a red cap, a werewolf, a dementor, a doxy, a boggart, and even a vampire have in common? Students shuffled their feet, glancing at one another, trying to determine any similarity between these extremely disparate creatures. What's the answer to this one? Ron whispered hopefully to Hermione. I don't know, she whispered back, her eyes looking somewhat wild. It's not in any of our textbooks, and most of those creatures aren't covered until 3rd year or higher. Somewhere near the front, an NPC raised his hand. Yes, Cedric, Quirrell asked the boy. They're not human, he said simply. and they all have some sort of weakness to memorize or a vulnerability to a particular charm or curse? Correct, Quirrell stammered, and 10 points for Hufflepuff. There was some astonished murmuring from the ranks. A Hufflepuff? Not that there's anything wrong with them. Great people, by the way. Answered a question about defense and got it right? Who was this boy? In short, Quirrell continued, as long as you're prepared and reasonably alert, most magical creatures pose little threat to a qualified wizard or witch. Now, who can tell me how fighting another wizard or witch is different? Again, it was Cedric who raised his hand first. Because, in theory, a wizard fighting another wizard is a fair fight, the handsome Hufflepuff explained. They both have access to the same spells, and since every spell, unforgivable of sight of course, can be countered in some fashion, it comes down to the differences between the individual witches or wizards in question. Correct again, Quirrell said, and another 10 points for Hufflepuff. Now, to the crux of the matter, what is the factor that will determine which wizard will prevail? This time, nearly every student in the hall raised their hand. Yes, Mr. Malfoy, Quirrell asked Draco, who was standing near the front, surrounded by a gaggle of Slytherins, as always. Blood purity and raw magical power, Draco said simply. Interesting, Quirrell said. And what say you, Miss Granger? Practicing the most advanced spells, Hermione answered, so that they can be cast reliably and effectively even under stressful circumstances. And you again, Master Diggory? Having friends and allies you can trust, Cedric said, something that dark wizards always lack, which is why they are always defeated. A true Hufflepuff answer, Quirrell said. I'm sure Helga herself would agree with you wholeheartedly. Milo realized that, while Quirrell seemed to be choosing people from the crowd completely at random, a suspiciously large number of them, that is to say, all of them, seemed to be PCs or major NPCs. Put Cedric on the list, Milo whispered to Harry. We'll be seeing more of him, count on it. Mr. Potter, Quirrell said, the only wizard here to survive an encounter with you know who. What would you say is the secret to your success? Harry, alone among the Hogwarts students, hadn't raised his hand. He said, well, I mean, I don't really know, so I would have to say luck. A million factors that neither wizard really knows about that come into play and could result in, well, like you said, me surviving against you-know-who. And what about you, Mr. Milo of the lengthy last name? Quirrell said. What determines the victor? Milo thought. Good question. Most people would say the highest level wizard wins, but that's not always true, now is it? A high-level wizard optimized for basket weaving and lute playing would be crushed by a properly optimized low-level wizard. The wizard who memorizes and casts the most appropriate spell wins, Milo says. Unless, like Harry said, the other one rolls a well-timed 20. That is, gets in an exceptionally lucky shot. But you can't count on that. Indeed, you cannot, Quirrell said, which brings me to the most important factor in a duel. He paused dramatically, letting everyone wonder what was going to say. Strategy. As any spell, with the obvious exceptions of course, can be countered. The duel goes to whichever wizard that doesn't make the first mistake. Curses, hexes, charms, and their counters can all be taught, learned, and practiced in a straightforward manner, which we will get to in good time, but a good strategy and thinking quickly on your feet cannot be without much difficulty. So that is where we will start. Quirrell gave his wand a complicated little wave, and the great hall tables rolled into the center of the room from their resting places along the edges. And there is no better way to develop strategy than with chess. Sitting on the tables were hundreds of neatly placed wizard's chess sets with a pair of small red tags sitting next to each. Everyone grab a partner and a tag, Quirrell said. The winner of the match takes the loser's tag and challenges someone with a like number of tags. The losers will keep playing against other losers until they realize their mistake. We will continue until we find the best strategist, and therefore duelist, among you. The Hogwarts students stared up at Quirrell in a stunned silence. Chess, Malfoy said flatly. We're going to play chess. Why are we listening to this stuttering idiot anyways? He's afraid of his own shadow. Have you ever entered a nest of vampires, Mr. Malfoy? Quirrell asked. And survived with only a stutter to show for it? Well, no, Quirrell interrupted. You have not. You will either pick a partner, Mr. Malfoy, or you will leave and wonder for the next 20 years why you are the worst duelist of your generation. Why 20 years? Draco asked, despite himself. An optimistic estimate of your lifespan, should you choose to forego these lessons. Malfoy paled and sat down across from Goyle, clipping a red tag to his lapel. This is ridiculous, Milo muttered to Hermione, his chess partner. Skill ranks in profession Chessmaster have no bearing on one's ability to stomp squishy wizards. See, the thing is, Hermione said, I know what all of those words mean in and of themselves, but the way you string them together, it's like someone handed a book of Mad Libs to a confused troll. I'm a confused troll, am I? Milo said with a slight edge in his voice. Well, you're blind to the story unfolding before your very eyes. Blind? Hermione asked, a dangerous glint in her eyes. No, you're just convinced this is some storybook fairy tale land where everything happens for a reason. And not a good reason, mind, but a stupid, trite, cliched reason. Not a story, Milo said, placing his pieces on the board. An adventure. Completely different school of magic. Real life does not have adventures, Hermione said, her voice growing louder. It has rules, responsible adults, homework, and grades. I think we've more or less exhausted the possibilities of this conversation, Milo said coolly. Roll for initiative, bookworm. Hermione, playing white, naturally won initiative. She sent one of her commoners forwards, breaking their naturally defensive spear wall and leaving her aristocrats vulnerable to a cavalry charge from Milo's flanking knights. My left and right clerics cast Wall of Stone and Flame Strike, respectively, Milo declared, while the commoners garrisoned these towers and ready an attack to provide covering fire should any white soldiers enter the range of their crossbows. The knights run up to this position. He placed the two horses near Hermione's clerics to attack of opportunity them should they try to cast anything, and my aristocrats take a full defensive action. Hermione said, you can only move one piece on your turn. Oh, we're tracking individual initiatives. Okay, in that case, Flame Strike. Let's see some reflex saves now, shall we? Why me? Hermione asked, the air dramatically. Why? What did I ever do to deserve this? You know what? Here, just take my tag. I forfeit. It's just not worth it. I'll go play with Neville over in the corner." Hermione stalked off as Milo clipped Hermione's tag to his robes under his own. "One down," he smirked. 400 to go. "Blimey," said one of Milo's clerics. "I don't think you quite understand how this works, do you?" "Holy crap, you can talk?" It didn't take long for Ron to win a small hoard of victory tags, crushing Milo mercilessly in the process, leaving him with only one opponent in his level, Cedric Diggory, the Uber Hufflepuff. The hundreds of defeated students gathered round, causing such a disturbance that Milo conjured up a massive illusionary chess set in the air that mimicked Ron's and Cedric's moves. The game progressed largely in silence, save for the occasional check from either player, as the two masters stared at the board, deep in concentration. The game had already lasted longer than the rest of the tournament put together, with the two of them sometimes taking up to 15 minutes for a single move. It was Cedric's turn, and after what seemed like years of careful consideration, he moved his remaining bishop forwards. "Check," he said finally. Ron moved like lightning, slamming his rook into place. "Checkmate, mate!" Ron exclaimed exuberantly. "Ah, shame," Cedric said, but it was with a smile that he passed over his original tag. "Good game, though, eh?" "Best I've ever played," Ron said sincerely. "And there you have it," Quirrell stammered to the crowd. "The most brilliant master strategist, and I'm sure accomplished duelist of the student body, is none other than Master Ronald Weasley." "Weasley?" Malfoy scoffed. "Brilliant! Hufflepuff will win the House Cup before Weasley learns to tie his shoes properly." "Class dismissed," Quirrell said with a wave. "Weasley, can I talk to you for a moment?" Ron said, looking somewhat panicked. "Sure, I guess." Milo followed Harry and Hermione back to the common room, where he sat in the corner working on Hannah's amulet. "I need to find a faster way of making these," he thought impatiently, etching a minute arcane rune into the sickle, destined for melting into the final medallion. "Well," Harry said, putting aside his History of Magic textbook, "that was sort of unexpected, don't you think?" "What, Quirrell's club?" Hermione asked. "Yeah," Harry said. "That man's off his rocker, I swear. Still, if it helps me learn to fight, well, I suppose it'll be worth it." "I agree," Milo said. "Whatever happened to him over the summers definitely unhinged him, and this chess is hardly an adequate simulation of a realistic battlefield conditions. I mean, why in the hells can the heavy cavalry only move in right angles? It makes no sense." "You're just sore because the rules can't be gamed," Hermione smirked, "which, incidentally, is why it's so popular. You have to use actual strategy and tactics." "Strategy is gaming the rules," Milo responded. "It's analyzing the situation and seeing any and every possible advantage, even if it's completely ridiculous on the surface. Why, I once met this half-ogre who managed to defeat an entire legion of the Thrallan Empire's best troops with a spiked chain because—" "I'm sorry," Hermione said, looking sick. "Did you say half-ogre?" Before Milo could answer, Ron entered the common room through the portal with a chess set in his hands. "Oi," Harry said. "What did Quirrell want?" "To play chess," Ron answered happily. "Weird, huh? He said he wants to test his skills against a worthy opponent, so every other day I make a move against him, and every other day he makes one against me. He gave me this chess set." Ron held up his new set, "which is linked to the one in his office. If I make a move here, he sees it there, and vice versa. Cool, huh?" "Why so slow?" Hermione asked. "If you wanted to test your dueling aptitude, shouldn't you be playing speed chess? Or using actual magic?" Milo added. "He said that this way, I'll have as much time as I need to think out my move and make sure I make the right one," Ron suggested. "He says it's more interesting that way. He implied that he hadn't had a decent sparring partner in years." "Seems a bit late in the plot for him to suddenly develop such major character traits as Grand Chessmaster," Milo mused. "I wonder what he's up to." Hermione glanced at Ron and rotated her finger slowly around her ear in the universally accepted sign for crazy. Maybe he just really likes chess, Harry suggested. I mean, it's not like we would have any chance to see it in action before, right? I suppose. But even so, Harry, add chess to the list and win that game against Quirrell. Why? Ron asked. I mean, I was planning to anyway, but why is it important? I don't know exactly, Milo said, but I have a gut feeling that something important is riding on that match, he said. And as a rule of thumb, winning always leads to the more desirable outcome. And with it, the best swag. Okay, well, I'll do my best, Ron said. And I'd best get to Quidditch practice, Harry said, raising from his armchair. We're playing Hufflepuff on Saturday, and Wood's gone into mad slave master mode again. This was nice, Hermione said, relaxing in her chair. What was? Milo asked. A whole weekend went by and nobody was hospitalized, she said. Except for Neville, of course, Milo said. Right, except Neville. Sad business, that. I had no idea a bishop could do that to a person. Still, be nice if every weekend was like this, but I suppose that'd just be wishful thinking. Despite Hermione's complacent attitude, Milo still felt something was wrong. This whole dueling club business smelled somewhat off to him, and he still didn't know who the dark wizard who imperioused him and Hannah was, or what they wanted. Was it Snape, trying to kill Milo to remove an obstacle between him and the stone? Or Lucius, stepping out from the shadows and getting his hands dirty personally? And why had Milo been imperious in the hallways? Whoever had done it didn't seem to get much out of it. The whole attack seemed, in hindsight, remarkably poorly planned. It's almost like they didn't want to succeed, or alternately, their goals were so obscure that Milo simply couldn't figure them out. Unless... Milo frowned. Once he'd been possessed, it didn't seem like his controller knew quite what to do with him. His orders had been vague and seemingly without purpose. Had it been one of the servants of the Dark Lord, surely he'd been ordered to kill Harry or steal the stone. If it was Lucius, or Snape for that matter, you'd think he'd be ordered to do something incriminating and be expelled, or failing that, simply walk out of the school grounds to be captured. And what of those other 11 minds he's detected? On the whole, if that were some sort of strike against Milo or his allies, it had been a rather clumsy attempt. The more Milo thought about it, the more he was certain that he was looking at things backwards. Suddenly, Milo felt as if a wight had an icy hand around his heart. Hermione, Milo said slowly, what were the methods you suggested for changing someone's heart's desire? Are you still on that? She asked, raking her memory. Love potions, the Confundus charm, or memory charm. Why? What exactly is a memory charm? Milo asked, but he was sure that he knew the answer already, back on Halloween, when Milo touched the Remember-All. It's an advanced spell that wipes someone's memory for a duration of time, she explained. A skilled user can replace them with false memories altogether. I wouldn't worry about it, though, she said reassuringly. Why not? Milo asked, feeling somewhat mollified. We don't have to learn about them until 7th year, she said happily. Milo cursed and nearly ran for the exit. Wait, Hermione called. Where are you going? To see Neville, Milo said. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that was Chapter 22. The Chessmaster. I think it's about time we had a little chat, Milo said, closing the office door behind him, about what really happened in the Forbidden Forest in September. Quirrell slid his office chair backwards slightly, covering the motion of his hand as he covertly drew his wand. What about it? He asked, his voice kept carefully neutral. There were always a few facts about that night that never really quite added up to me, Milo said, ignoring the professor. For example, how did I get poisoned? The Acromantula never had a chance. How did the Acromantula die? The log I dropped on it wasn't nearly enough to do the deed. It looked quite heavy to me, Quirrell stammered. It should have shrugged the log off and eaten me on the spot, Milo told him. and its body had no signs of prior injury, so it isn't like the log was enough to push it over the edge into negative hit points. No, something else killed that acromantula. Something that kills its target, without leaving a trace. Coral tightened the grip on his wand beneath his desk. I don't... Oh, I think you do, Milo said. There's only one spell that could do that. And hells, you used it against Fluffy. You're a hero for it, after all. The killing curse. Well, what? But the curse is hardly stealthy. It has a signature bright green flash. The spider was right in front of me, and it was pitch dark. There's no possible way I could have missed it. You must have, Coral said. Or rather, the acromantula died of some other. No, Milo cut him off. Don't you see? I saw the spider killed. A wizard did it right before my very eyes. He just walked right up, killed the acromantula, and left. He cut off one of the spider's fangs. Acromantula venom is potent even after death, after all, and stabbed me in the stomach with it. I saw everything. Then why didn't you say so earlier? Milo reached into his robes, and Coral, surprised, nearly killed him on the spot. It was only the knowledge that Milo had no need of a wand to use magic that stayed his hands. Of all things, it was a remember-all that Milo withdrew from his pocket. A remember-all which shone like the sun. I was memory charmed. That's hardly proof, Coral pointed out. Perhaps you simply forgot to brush your teeth last night? I, like every self-respecting arcanist, use prestidigitation, which is quite besides the point. I can prove to you that it was no inconsequential memory that I've forgotten, Milo said calmly. Describe the remember-all for me, Professor. I don't understand, Coral said. It's quite simple. Just a quick description of this ball will suffice. Coral shrugged. What's this boy's game? It's a tennis ball-sized, clear glass ball full of smoke, Coral said. It turns red when the holder forgets something and clear when it is remembered. That's an awful lot of adjectives, Professor, Milo said with a slight grin. At least 4. So what? And it first turned up months ago in a seemingly inconsequential manner. Something unimportant about Harry joining the Quidditch team, and again on Halloween when it broke. Fortunately, one of Neville's supporting characters sent him a replacement. That means this is the 3rd time it's turned up, Professor. This matters how? Rule of 3. This here, judging by the amount of attention it's gathered, is a very significant plot device. Why, it'd be simply a waste of time if I didn't turn out to be important. That's your proof? I've seen men hanged for less in Myra, City of Light, City of Magic. Even assuming this is true, Coral said, watching the boy closely, who would do such a thing? I think we both know the answer to that, Professor. Coral tensed, ready to strike. It was, of course, Milo said, leaning forward slightly, none other than Professor Snape. Snape? Coral asked. How do you know? Honestly, who else could it be? Milo asked. You can't shake a staff in this castle without finding an evil plot Snape's behind. I'm starting to think he's the only teacher. He's only still a teacher because of how dull things would be without him. Why wouldn't he just let the acromantula kill you? Coral asked. That's the bit I can't figure out, Milo admitted, but I'm sure he'll be good enough to explain it in his villain monologue at the end. Why are you telling me this? Oh, simple. Snape can pull memories from my head, so I figure I should disseminate important information to trustworthy NPCs, as a sort of a backup. Also, and I hate to say this, I'm starting to think I'll need all the help I can get. The situation is becoming complicated, for a number of reasons. Gods, what I wouldn't give for a straightforward side quest or a monster hunt. In any event, I don't suppose you know of any way to cure memory charms? Sorry, Quirrell apologized. I'm afraid they're generally quite permanent. Hells, Milo cursed. And protection from evil won't do a thing against them either, based on Hermione's description, which means I'll need to think of something clever. Well, I suppose it can't be used on me as long as I've got my... Milo trailed off for a second. That's it, he exclaimed, and headed back for the door. Wait, Quirrell called out, but Milo, frustratingly, seemed suddenly oblivious to his existence. It was like an attack of opportunity, Milo explained to his party, and Hannah. The plan wasn't to imperious me to further their elaborate scheme. He imperioused me because I was there. Why? Harry asked. Milo was standing in front of them in the Gryffindor common room, a revised version of the plot, hovering in the air, shimmering slightly. To prevent me from finding out what they were up to with his 11 disillusioned friends, Milo answered. He didn't even know or care about the mirror. He just wanted me gone before I figured out what he was up to. And it worked, too. So why not simply stun you, Hermione asked. Or better, just finish you off for good, Ron added. Or even better, memory charm you, like you said he did after the acromantula. I can't say for sure, Milo said, but I think it's because he was hoping nobody would notice. A perfect crime, so to speak. Snape doesn't seem to be skilled enough at memory charms to replace the target's memories with false ones. At least I hope he isn't, or we're all screwed. So I'd wake up wondering where the last several minutes went. Something which Morty here would be all too happy to fill me in on. As for why he didn't kill me, well, he doesn't seem to want me dead anymore for some reason. Except when he does. He's very inconsistent, in fact. What do you mean? Hannah asked. Well, Milo explained, one day he wants me expelled, and the next he's possessing you to kill me. Sorry about that, Hannah said quietly. It wasn't your fault, Milo said. Just keep your amulet on, and you'll be fine. Milo had decided on impulse to give Hannah the amulet of protection from evil that he'd reserved for himself, meaning that he'd have to wait another 2 days for his. He still wasn't quite sure why he'd done it. I'm starting to wonder if something more complicated isn't going on, Milo said. Even more complicated than that? Ron groaned, pointing to the plot. Snape's erratic attempts just aren't lining up anymore. If he really wanted me resting in Bacab's uncaring embrace, why did Hannah open up with stunners? I thought you said she used unforgivables, Hermione said. She switched to them when I ducked for cover, Milo explained. Unless there's some rule or class feature I'm unaware of, if Hannah's strategy made no sense. Hey, Hannah said. Sorry, I mean Snape's strategy made no sense. Well, Hermione mused, maybe he doesn't want you dead at all? Then why did Hannah use killing curses at all? Milo asked. It's completely nonsensical. Then one of your assumptions is wrong, Hermione said bluntly. Personally, I don't think it's Snape at all. But we know it's him, Milo protested. He was out meeting Lucius in the forest and everything. Use your eyes, Hermione. He's so obviously villainous. And yet, Hermione said coolly, Dumbledore, the brightest mind of his generation and the most powerful wizard alive, lets him teach here regardless. What do we know about Snape? That he's a smarmy git, Ron suggested helpfully. That he's allergic to shampoo, Harry added. No, Harry said firmly. We know that he met Lucius in the forest, and Lucius ordered him to have you expelled, Milo. Expelled, not murdered. Well, maybe he's upped the ante since then? See, I don't think he has. Assuming he was behind the attack on Harry in the Quidditch match, and the test to show that you can't make potions, that's two completely non-lethal attempts to expel you. Then why would he release a troll on Halloween, stab me with an acromantula fang, possess Hannah to kill me, and have the drow in the kitchen poison my treacle tart? Milo asked. Why indeed, Hermione smiled. What if he didn't do any of those things? What? Milo scoffed. Are you suggesting the treacle tart poisoned itself on its own accord? No, Hermione continued. I'm suggesting there's a different agent at play here. Could you adjust the display for a moment? place Snape and Mr. Malfoy off to the side with the various attempts to expel you, and Draco to a different side with his fumbled Quidditch plots. If it makes you happy, Milo said, adjusting the illusion. But that leaves a big hole here, though, with the various assassination attempts. Indeed it does, agreed Hermione. So, who fills the gap? Ron asked. Ron asked it. That's the question we should be asking. You aren't seriously suggesting there's 3 entirely separate camps of villains working against us? Milo asked. That'd just be a huge mess. They'd spend half their time tripping over themselves. Why shouldn't there be? Hermione asked. Sometimes real life is just a huge mess. Old Took's razor suggests otherwise, Milo countered. Hermione paused. Don't you mean Occam's razor? She asked tentatively. The simplest solution is usually the best one? Psh, what nonsense is that? Milo said dismissively. No, it's the most dramatically appropriate solution is usually the best one. In this case, it's clearly that you know who is pulling all the strings behind the scenes. Milo rearranged the plot to demonstrate. Except that there's some unknown factor thrown in there as well. Probably a betrayal by someone close to us, I'm thinking Neville, which will only be revealed by the villain's final rant. And, as the time-tested Tensor's theorem states, any attempt to discover a shocking twist before the end of an adventure will be doomed to failure, so focus on the job in front of you. Ergo, defeating Puffs in Quidditch. I don't follow, Hermione admitted. Remember when Harry stomped the Slytherins? Milo asked. It was a big deal. The Daily Prophet had a field day about something to do with broomsticks anyways. That both the Nimbus and the prototype Firebolt seemed to suffer from a similar flaw and went haywire, Ron said, and that the boy who lived is quote-unquote, in addition to being top student in his year, also the best seeker in Hogwarts has had in many a year. But I'm not Harry protested. Hold up, I haven't even gotten to the part where it talks about how supremely handsome you are, Ron snickered. Malfoy wasn't mentioned at all, by the way. You see, Milo said, there's obviously some kind of subplot or side quest involving Quidditch. I can only assume that we'll get bonus XP or magic items if we win the cup, so we'll win. But that match against Slytherin was hardly fair, Harry said. There were plots within bloody plots. I've only been in one real game. What if Hufflepuff wins? Well, Milo said conspiratorially, I think I can help you a bit there. Mount your brooms, please, Milo heard Madam Hooch say from his seat up in the stands. The Hufflepuffs had arrived with banners bearing a variety of fairly unoriginal slogans and occasional trash talk, but Milo suspected that was from the Slytherins, who, strangely, had come out to the Witch and Wizard to root for the Hufflepuffs. To which Milo had responded with a silent image of a 50-foot-tall crimson and gold Gryffindor lion devouring a Hufflepuff badger. When he added Ghost Sound, which accurately mimicked in both pitch and volume the roar of an enraged dire tiger, amplified by the voices of the actual students of House Gryffindor and more than a few Ravenclaws, McGonagall awarded him 5 points for amazing spell work and then banned all form of banner, magical or otherwise, from the rest of the match. When Hooch gave the loud blast of her whistle, the signal to start the game, the players blasted off into the air, but Harry was much, much faster than the rest. This was due to a combination of 2 factors: Harry's vastly superior Nimbus broomstick, and the fact that he was currently under the effects of Levitate, making him effectively weightless. Locate object Golden Snitch, Milo muttered under his breath. Message. Harry, it's 33 degrees to my right and 18 degrees upwards. Milo had carefully chosen the seat closest to dead center of the auditorium that he could manage, which put him, unfortunately, almost directly next to Snape. As Milo continued to mutter instructions under his breath, he noticed something surprising. Quirrell, sitting nearby, had one eyebrow cocked quizzically. Probably thinks I'm praying or something, Milo thought. He can't know what I'm up to, though, can he? Idly, Milo wondered if there was a rule against him pointing the snitch out to Harry. In any case, what could they do, Milo thought. It's not like you can award a penalty against the audience. The Hufflepuffs, to be fair, did fairly well for themselves. They managed to seize possession of the quaffle early on, and the three chasers, passing the ball between themselves rapidly, were quickly boring down on wood, defending the goal. Not that it helped them much in the end. Roughly 40 seconds, 42 to be precise, or exactly 7 rounds, after the start of the match, Lee Jordan's magically amplified voice rang out over the pitch. "Potter has the snitch! Potter has the snitch! Ha ha! Take that, you dumb, dirty Hufflepuff Jordan!" McGonagall shouted sharply. "Broomstick flyers, Professor. I was going to say broomstick flyers. Honest." The score was 150-0. The Hufflepuffs were too stunned to process their defeat, much less respond, which, while close to 1/3 of the audience erupted into thunderous applause. "Blimey," said Fred, who sat nearby. "We're going to need to raid Honeydukes again," said George. It was, as Lee pointed out happily, the second shortest Quidditch match in Hogwarts history. The shortest, in 1412, ended before the whistle was finished blowing. The snitch had flown directly down a Hufflepuff chaser's throat. The Hufflepuff died, tragically, but there was much rejoicing nonetheless. It had been Hufflepuff's first win in over 3 centuries. "Now that you know the basics of disarming," Quirrell stammered to the Dueling Club that Sunday, which had shrunk somewhat since their first chess-oriented meeting. Please pick a partner and practice." They'd spent all morning learning... Hold on. I've been told how to say this. They'd spent all morning learning Expelliarmus. Or rather, everyone else had spent all morning learning Expelliarmus. Ugh, that word in me. Milo had been alone in the corner working out some of the kinks in his fireball spell research. Quirrell's call to grab partners caught Milo somewhat by surprise, and he wound up partnered off to first-year Ravenclaw NPCs. "I will count to 3, Quirrell said, "and you will both try to disarm your partner. Only disarm, Mr. Crabbe. I saw that look." Milo looked up and down the line of students. To the upper years, of course, Expelliarmus was an old hat, but in Quirrell's words, they could always be better. "Aren't you going to draw?" a Ravenclaw asked him nervously. "What do I look like, a sketch artist?" Milo snorted derisively. "No, your wand," the boy hissed. Milo blinked. "Oh, right," he thought, and pulled his shiny, barely used wand from his pocket. He could still smell the varnish that Ollivander, Milo shuddered, repressing the horrible memories, used. 1, Quirrell counted. The Ravenclaw's wand hand shook. Milo wondered vaguely if a local wizard could accidentally trigger a silent spell just by making the right hand motions. 2, Milo whistled casually, staring at the great hall's amazing ceiling. 3, Quirrell finished. A great cry of Expelliarmus roared up from the upper years, and wands flew in every direction. The first and second years, however, were not generally quite so lucky. Most of their spells fizzled out feebly, having hardly any impact whatsoever on their target's wands. Hermione managed to get Ron to drop his wand, but Ron later confessed, out of earshot of Hermione of course, that he dropped it because his hand was sweaty. Without a doubt, the worst student off in the hall was Milo's poor Ravenclaw target, who found himself pinned to the ground by a hippogriff that had not existed a moment before. Several nearby first years turned and ran in horror, their screams echoing throughout the hall. "Fetch, Rary!" Milo called to a summoned monster. The hippogriff grabbed the Ravenclaw's wand from his feebly protesting hand and trotted over to Milo, dropping it at his feet. "Good girl! Now go back up to the upper planes from whence you came!" Milo waved his hand, and the hippogriff vanished as suddenly as it arrived. Students nearby, those who hadn't run off, backed away from Milo slowly. The Ravenclaw lay sobbing on the ground. "It was horrible," he moaned to himself, "with the talons and the beak and the eyes! Merlin, the eyes! The cold and caring eyes!" I think I won," Milo said over the screams and tears. "You're disarmed." the fact that non-lethal combat and stage frights only awarded less than half XP regardless, Milo had almost paid off a week of item crafting with a single spell. Eyes looked towards Quirrell expectantly, the Hogwarts students presumably waiting for him to either tell Milo off or deduct house points for traumatizing children. The defense professor, however, did nothing more than watch Milo with unreadable eyes. If I get 75 XP for every first year I defeat in a duel, Milo mused, I wonder how much I could earn practicing against a second year, or for that matter, a 7th year. As a couple of students carted off the gibbering Ravenclaw, Milo found himself face to face with Harry Potter. Look, Milo said to his bespectacled party member, we're an unbalanced party right now, and I'm higher level than you. That's just fact. It's not a bad thing necessarily. Everyone started at level 1 at some point. You'll get up to my level one day, but until then, don't feel bad when you lose. It's really not your fault. I am a wildly inappropriate CR for you. 1, Quirrell counted. Don't worry, Harry said quietly. I won't. 2. Glad to hear. I won't lose, that is. Milo simply chuckled softly. 3. Expelliarmus! Milo stared in horror at his suddenly empty gloved hand. His useless wand had been tossed halfway across the great hall in plain view of dozens of witnesses. By a level 1, in a fair fight. How did you do that? Milo explained. Half your year can't even cast the spell, much less on their first try after winning initiative. I don't know, Harry admitted. The spell just sort of came naturally to me. Rematch? Milo asked. Sure, Harry agreed. Without needing to be asked, Morty dropped out of his pocket and scurried across the floor to retrieve the wand. Whoever's wand hits the floor first loses. Expelliarmus! Harry cast again as soon as Quirrell finished counting. Milo's wand flew out of his hand, but abruptly stopped in midair a few feet behind him and floated back into his hand. How did you cast Mage Hand when you weren't looking? Also, grease. The wand in Harry's hand suddenly slipped through his fingers out of his right hand, but with reflexes only a seeker could match, he caught it with his left. Expelliarmus! Hells! Milo cursed as the wand flew from his fingers again. He'd have to break concentration on Mage Hand in order to cast Grease, which he'd been certain would win the duel. Rematch? Harry suggested cheerily. Count on it, Milo answered, and waited for Quirrell to start counting again. I'll have to stop underestimating him, Milo decided. He must have improved initiative and a high dexterity score. Makes sense considering his Quidditch skills. 3, Quirrell finished. Nerve Skitter, Grease! Milo called, while Harry shouted Expelliarmus simultaneously. Both their wands dropped to the floor with a clatter. Milo picked up his wand and twirled it about his fingers idly. A few nearby students gave him an askance glance. If any of them had started spinning a wand like it was a pencil, something was likely to catch fire. That was impressive, Milo admitted grudgingly. If I'm level 5 and Harry's level 1, is Harry still level 1? Then he just got enough XP from me to level up about a dozen times. Could Harry level up? Do these local yokels even have levels in the conventional sense? And if so, do they gain XP? The idea seemed far-fetched to him, but it wasn't impossible. Redcaps, for example, increased in level by dipping their caps into the blood of dead sentient creatures. At least his redcaps did. Thank you, Harry said, sounding genuinely pleased. Not like it'll do any good in a real battle, of course. Are you kidding? Milo asked. A no-save auto-disarm spell against enemies incapable of using magic without a wand in their hand? What you've got there, buddy, is a game changer. Sure, the other side seems awfully fond of killing curses, but really, when it comes down to it, they're tactically almost identical. A wandless wizard and a dead wizard are different only in time elapsed. I suppose, Harry said, his brow furrowed. Shall we call it a draw, then? Milo managed to disarm another 3 NPCs in first and second years before running out of disarm-capable magic, at which point he became target practice. Yeah, laugh it up, Milo muttered, picking up his wand for the dozenth time in a row after some snotty punk of a Ravenclaw disarmed him. Odd how the more he lost, the snottier and punkerier his opponents seemed to become. And I think that's all for today, Quirrell said, dismissing the club. Almost everyone turned to leave, but a large number of students, including, to Milo's satisfaction, a certain young Malfoy heir, had to root around to find their wands first. As people filed towards the exits, the turbaned professor walked over to where Milo was grumbling. I have to ask, Quirrell said softly, why are you in this club? It's not like you can learn anything I have to teach. Are you kidding? Milo asked. I got 225 experience points today. Not a patch on what I got from that red cap over the holidays, but it's a respectable amount nonetheless. Indeed, Quirrell said, and suddenly smiled. Well, I'm glad to hear it. The strange thing was, he really did seem happy on Milo's behalf. Great, Milo thought irritably. For once, I succeeded a sense motive check, and that's what I learned? Why do I even bother? Thanks, Milo muttered. Something you said last week stuck in my mind, Quirrell said, about side quests and subplots. Oh? I think I have one such opportunity, Quirrell said quietly. But it must stay between us. Can you agree to that? Of course, Milo said. He knew a plot hook when he saw it, and he'd say just about anything to get the conversation to the quest offer point. Something is still preying on unicorns, Quirrell said conspiratorially. Is the troll back? Milo asked. I heard it ran off pretty quickly last time. No, Quirrell said. At least not to my knowledge. No, I believe something else is hunting the poor, defenseless, innocent unicorns. Really? Milo asked, intrigued. So the troll was innocent the whole time. That complicates things even further, he mused. And now it's extremely dangerous, Quirrell said. And I quite understand if you... I'm in, Milo interrupted. Adventurers, as a rule, don't go around not doing extremely dangerous things. What's the job? Quirrell was thrown by Milo's sudden agreement to help, but he didn't show it. There's a cave deep within the forbidden forest, Quirrell exclaimed. So deep, it's nearly on the far border. Caves are good, Milo said fervently. Gods, what he'd do for a decent dungeon crawl. Not this cave, I fear. It's unlikely, but I fear its previous occupants have returned. And they're killing the unicorns for blood? They do seem the type, Quirrell admitted, being vampires. Milo gave a low whistle. He knew he hadn't been carrying around 5 pounds of garlic powder all these years in vain. Why do you need my help? Milo asked. Quirrell glanced from side to side nervously. To tell the truth, he said, I'm terrified. It's my duty as defense professor to investigate, but... Vampires? Yes, thank you. Bloodsuckers terrify me. I wouldn't be asking for help if I didn't know you had so much experience with them. When do we leave? Milo asked. Friday, Quirrell said. Just after dark. Milo was so fixated on his conversation with Quirrell that he completely failed to notice that Draco Malfoy, despite having long since found his wand, had yet to leave the room. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me. I'm working on getting all of the videos edited and up, and I'll let you know on my Instagram or Facebook when that happens. Thank you all so much for being here. And remember, if people can hate for no reason, then you can love I love you all. I'll see you soon. Bye.